Mark had always dreamed of owning a place in the woods, away from the noise and stress of the city. He was browsing online for some properties when he stumbled upon a listing that seemed too good to be true. A cozy rustic cabin on a large plot of land, surrounded by pine trees and a lake for a bargain price. The only catch was that the seller, a widow named Mrs. Smith, wanted to meet the buyer in person and finalize the deal as soon as possible. Mark contacted Mrs. Smith and arranged to visit the next day. He drove for hours, following her directions until he reached a dirt road to the property. He parked his car and got out, admiring the scenery. The cabin looked even better than in the pictures, with a stone chimney, a wooden porch, and a swing. He knocked on the door and was greeted with a warm smile by a friendly old lady. "Hello, dear. You must be Mark. I'm so glad you came. Please come in. I've made some tea for us," Mrs. Smith said, inviting him inside. Mark followed her into the cabin, which was cozy and charming, with a fireplace, a sofa, a kitchen, and a bedroom. He noticed no pictures on the walls, no personal belongings, nothing indicating that someone lived there. "So, Mrs. Smith, why are you selling this place?" "It's beautiful," Mark asked, sipping his tea. "Oh, dear, I'm getting old and can't take care of it anymore. My husband passed away a few years ago and I have no children. I want to move to the city and be closer to my sister. She's been nagging me to do it for a long time," Mrs. Smith said with a sigh. "I'm sorry to hear that, but you're lucky to have a sister who cares about you. I'm an only child and my parents are gone too. That's why I want to buy this cabin. I need a place to call my own to relax and enjoy nature," Mark said, feeling a connection with the old lady. "That's very sweet, dear. I'm sure you'll love it here. It's very peaceful and quiet. The only thing you must worry about is the wildlife. Some bears and wolves are around, so you must be careful. But don't worry, the cabin is sturdy and safe. It's been in my family for generations. It's like a living thing. It has a personality of its own. Sometimes it creaks and groans, but that's just its way of talking to you. It's very loyal and protective of its owners. It will never let anything harm you," Mrs. Smith said with a fond look in her eyes. Mark smiled, thinking that she was just being sentimental. He finished his tea and said, "Well, Mrs. Smith, I think I've seen enough. I love this cabin, and I want to buy it. How much do you want for it?" Mrs. Smith smiled back and said, "Oh dear, you don't have to pay me anything. I'm giving it to you as a gift. Consider it my way of thanking you for being kind and respectful. All I ask is that you sign this paper. It's just a formality. It says that you accept the cabin with all its quirks and flaws, and you will never try to sell or change it. Do you agree?" Mark was stunned by her generosity. He felt a surge of gratitude and excitement. He didn't care about the paper. He just wanted to own the cabin. He quickly signed it and handed it back to her. "Thank you, Mrs. Smith. You're very generous. I can't believe this is happening. I'm so happy," Mark said, hugging her. "You're welcome, dear. I'm happy too. You're the perfect owner for this cabin. It will love you as much as I do," Mrs. Smith said, hugging him back. She let go of him and said, "Well, dear, I must go now. My sister is waiting for me in the city. I've packed my things and I'm ready to leave. You can stay here tonight and start your new life tomorrow. I hope you'll be very happy here. Goodbye, dear. Take care of yourself and the cabin." She grabbed her suitcase and walked out the door, leaving Mark alone in the cabin. He watched her go, feeling mixed emotions but happy to have the cabin. Deciding to explore it more and make himself comfortable, he went to the bedroom and saw a large bed with a quilt. As he lay down on it, he felt a wave of relaxation, closing his eyes and drifting into sleep. Mark woke up in the middle of the night, feeling a strange sensation. He felt like he was being watched. He opened his eyes and saw glowing red eyes staring at him from the darkness as the door to the room slowly creaked open. He gasped and tried to get up, but he couldn't move. He felt something heavy on his chest, something that was crushing him. He looked down and saw that the quilt was alive. It had teeth and claws and it bit and scratched him. He screamed in pain and terror, but no one heard him. He realized that the cabin was the monster. It had lured him in with its charm and then trapped him. It was feeding on him slowly and painfully. He remembered Mrs. Smith's words. It was loyal and protective of its owners. It would never let anything harm them. It would never let them go. He wished he had never signed that paper. He wished he had never met Mrs. Smith. He wished he had never seen the cabin. He wished he was dead. But then he woke up again. He was lying on the bed, covered with the quilt. He looked around and saw that everything was normal. The cabin was quiet and peaceful. He touched his chest and felt no pain or blood. He rubbed his eyes and wondered if it was all a dream, a horrible, vivid nightmare. He got up and went to the bathroom. He splashed water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. He saw no marks or scars on his skin. He sighed and tried to calm himself down. He told himself that it was just a bad dream caused by his excitement or anxiety, and that the cabin was not a monster, but a gift. Calming down, he returned to bed, pulled the quilt over him, and closed his eyes. As he tried to sleep, he felt a slight movement under the quilt. Then a faint sound was heard like a growl, followed by a cold breath on his neck. He opened his eyes and saw the glowing red eyes again. Only this time, he realized it was not a dream, for he wasn't asleep yet. It was real. It was happening. A wave of panic and dread washed over him. His heartbeat quickened and his breath turned shallow and erratic. His mouth dried up and his skin grew cold and clammy. Mark's muscles tensed and twitched as his mind raced with thoughts of hopelessness, though a solid urge to flee, fight, or do anything surged within him. He found himself immobilized. In that moment, the realization hit him. He was destined for a slow and painful demise. He cursed himself for accepting Mrs. Smith's offer without a second thought. Who gives away a cabin, especially one in the woods, no less for free? He asked himself as he grappled with his fear. He screamed, but it was too late. The quilt wrapped around him and dragged him into the darkness. The cabin swallowed him whole. He was the cabin's owner and the cabin's prey.